There's a running joke that I'm a really funny guy and I really know how to make good jokes. That's kind of a myth. So I try to just put a slide like this just to do the funny part right at the beginning. We are going to talk a little bit about state, and the title of the talk is State in a Stateless World. I like to keep them all mystically because we tend to do our code like stateless. We want our code to be, our REST APIs to be completely not aware of anything, but still we are concerned a little bit about state, so it's a little play with words. My name is Luka Muzinic. I come from Zagreb, Croatia. I'm a developer, whatever that means these days. People use the word independent contractor, but it's just a job with a shovel and shoveling a lot of code around. I've been also a teacher for like 5 years. I've been teaching and mentoring new developers, teaching them how to create great web applications. So a lot of those teaching habits still kind of stick to me. I tend to give out homeworks, ask your parents to come see me after the conference. Yes, you sir, please close the door, stop chewing gum, and so on and so forth. So I've been doing this for quite a while now, and since I can't be teaching, I'm doing more fancy word for it, coaching. So going to a company and then teach more developers. If I can't do that, there's this great site that I discovered recently. It's called Code Mentor, and you can go there, apply to be a mentor to others, and you can get paid to be a mentor. So if you have any skills that you can teach others, check out this site. If you have any lacking skills, also check out this site and be a mentee, so you can get some seriously good help. If you are concerned with general data protection law, this link is also be tracking if you come to the site, because I really want to know if me talking about them really helps. I also have some Code Mentor t-shirts and stickers that I will be giving out if you ask questions, so that's also motivation. So why do we need state? I mean, we all have some projects going on. We all have some things that we want to store. Yes, our applications are restless and we don't use state, but in a sense we do use. As you probably know, the context is a very important thing. So context here, the context of our state, the thing that we are concerned about is, does the state changes with a lot of impact for our application? For example, if you have a user entity and a user changes an email, is that a big of an impact for your application? So if you go through your code, okay, something's there, okay, I'm just emailing user a monthly newsletter. I mean, after last Friday, you're not doing that anymore. But it's not a big impact. So if you want to publish a newsletter, you just send it out to all the emails you have. It's not a big impact for your application. But if your user entity kind of changes the flag from standard user to admin user, that's a big change. And you want to make sure that all of your application is checking the user is admin or is moderator somewhere in the code. So when we look at our state, we can look at the whole property, at the single property, or we can look at the whole user. So this is the state that we are concerned with. So the problem that you might have, or you might have had a couple of years back, you can have a user that registers on a forum. Okay, you send him a verification link. User has to click that link, and then that user is no longer a registered user. That user becomes a verified user. So that's a different state. If that user continues to contribute to the forum, helps others, you might want to promote him to moderator. Him as a moderator can monitor other users. So if somebody starts to use a lot of provocative words in his posts, he might flag him. Other moderator can maybe review that flag and then ban him, and after a while, you can even lock him out of your account. So each state change, and I'm talking a user becoming a registered user, verified, and moderator, and so on and so forth, each stage brought some things that that user can't or cannot do. So if you were a developer and your business person, project manager, or whatever your favorite CEO kind of thing is, in your organization comes and says, yeah, I want that feature. I want to have users going through different stages in our forum. What would you do? You would say, okay, it's pretty simple enough. I would just fire up my code editor, add another property on my user model, and put some getters and setters on that. So that's the easiest way to do it, right? We can discuss later on if maybe the easiest way to do it is just by making all properties public, but that's a really, really long debate somewhere along the lines of discussing whether to use tabs versus spaces. But this is something that we are probably getting used to. And of course, we need to store that change somewhere in our database, make it persistent, and we're going to use, again, a repository. Again, somebody may discuss that Active Record is better thing to do, and this is also one of those discussions that can start wars, so let's leave it for at least after lunch. It's all good, it's all fine, changing state as that is very, very simple process. But situations are not always that simple. There are always some business rules, there are always some things that you can or cannot do, and they are usually imported into your project from the outside world. So for example, if you work at a warehouse, you might not check out something if it's not paid. Very, very simple rule. If your logged user is not a moderator, maybe he can't flag the user as being malicious. So you have to check the context where the request coming from. Or you have like ridiculously outside rules, like one from my country. I live in Croatia, and we have a very ridiculous amount of government involvement and ridiculous laws. So for example, every receipt that you give to your customers for a cash transaction has to go to the IRS. IRS gives you a unique number that you need to print out, and you need to give a receipt out with that thing. That by itself is not that ridiculous. I mean, yeah, you want to be sure that all the receipts are accounted for. The ridiculous thing is that your shop, your store can have business hours. So if you give the receipt out of the business hours, you get a fine. Yeah, so you might want to not implement that business rule because, yeah, I only work from 8 to 4. So if I put business hours like up to 5, I should be good. There's no problem there. I go home at 4:30 and there's no problem. But later on, somebody would create a web shop that can work 24 hours and probably forget about that detail. So entering business rules in your system is a really, really fine thing to do, and it's a smart way to do it. So you're probably thinking right now, okay, I know how to change the state, but is there a smarter way to add business rules? Yeah, what would you do? And I've seen people looking up, reaching for that part of the brain that works with memory. Yeah, I pretty have some good idea of how to do it. And there's actually a pattern for that. So if you look for that problem, you'll see that this problem is described as a state pattern, how to handle state in your system. So what you do when you want to learn about new patterns, you open a Gang of 4 book, right? At least that's what I do. That's what I did a couple of years back. That's what I did even more years back. And the problem with the Gang of 4 book, it's really, really, really hard book. I mean, first time I got the recommendation for that book. It was like, hey, it's going to make you a better programmer. You'll be a superstar programmer, 10x, whatever. Read this book. I opened up a book, and I started crying because I didn't understand a single thing that this thing is talking about, because these are design patterns and architecture, and I'm just creating and submitting forms. So it really, really didn't make any sense. So I put the book down. A couple of years later, I can understand 10% more of that book, so I hope by the end of my life, I will understand it whole. Luckily, there's Google, there's Stack Overflow, and those sorts of things. So I even found a better repo for that. It's one from Sebastian Bergman that just kind of explains the state pattern throughout code, and it's very nice. Basically, what it boils down to, we want our object to appear that they have changed class. So if we have a user object and we do something on that and try something else, it should appear as it's a different class, but it's still one class in. So you might be wondering at this point, why did I put a picture of phpsrb form next to a state pattern? I'm going to talk about forms. Back in the day, it was like a requirement for every site to have one of these. I don't know if you were responsible for installing them to your customers. At least I was for like a dozen occasions. Every site had to have a forum for one short period of time. And I also ran one forum for my local community. And it was really nice. We had members coming in, we have like lively debates, what we could change in our neighborhood, what's being done, where to go out, and so on and so forth. So our community was really a live one. We had like 1,200 members communicating daily, and so on and so forth. And if you look at our forum as a business, you can see that you could see that we had one procedure. I mean, we wanted our forum to be as open to everybody as possible, but we also wanted people not posting crap. So we had like a hidden forum where we could talk about other members and see, okay, this guy uses a lot of profanities. Maybe we should issue warnings for him, and then after a while, if his behavior doesn't change, we can ban him for a couple of weeks until he cools down, and so on and so forth. So in a nutshell, our business process, if you ever considered using a forum as a business process, looked like this. We had a user that registered and became verified, and we can flag him for review. And after that, we would either revoke that flag, we could ban him for 2 weeks, or we could lock his account repeatedly. So, of course, locking of the account would be really for repeated offenders. But we had a business process that looked like this. It's not a big business process, but for our case, it worked. It did not have any support from the software, but let's pretend that it did, and let's pretend to build this feature further on. So building a state pattern for this would go like this. Define a user state interface, because we are really concerned at what our user is in. So we define all the methods as transitions between our states. So as you can see, the arrows have little verbs, and those verbs are very direct. They are almost to the point they are ordering you to do something. So like verify this user, ban this user. So these are transitions, these are orders that you are giving out to a state machine. So when you define all those transitions, that's a complete list. There's nothing else to be done here. You can then define an abstract class where you are going to be very defensive about it and say, okay, all those transitions are going to be forbidden as a default. If you're just trying out and just started learning object-oriented programming, I know I struggle with what an abstract class is. This is also a very good example of something that you cannot use but it really nicely fits between your interface and some other usable classes. So you are actually being very defensive about every transition. You are saying as a default state, as default, we are not allowing any transition to happen. And then for each state, you define a separate class. So if you have a registered user state, you will have a separate class for that, and then just enable that transition. And by enabling that, I mean create that method as a factory to another state. So every transition will create another state, return it back, and we can proceed through our business process even further. So our verified user can go back. We can't go back to being registered because it would be a complicated process of revoking our email address. So we're at this point, we can go back. And remember, still, all other transitions will throw an exception, so we can't just ban the user immediately. We want our model to reflect that, and also a security precaution so that we don't have any rogue moderators just banning users and creating havoc on our forum. So if you want to have like more transitions possible, it's totally legit, and you go on and proceed through your business case. So up until this point, we are just talking about states and how can we change the states. We also need to see how we can put all this logic into our user model. So let's try to shove this in the easiest way possible. So putting that state logic in our entity means creating that user and putting a constructor method with the user state in mind. So we need to store it somewhere, and we need to have an initial state to worry about. And then just define all the methods as a proxy method to our user state. So here you will see that I just defined the verify one because I could not fit on the slide all the possible transitions. And we are just proxying everything there. So it is a little bit complicated to use this kind of object because we need to try catch all the things, see if the transition is possible, can we actually do it, or otherwise we would get an exception and our application would break. So there is some boilerplate code to write and to worry about when you're actually using this object. But testing this object is very, very easy, and just to annoy Miro, it needs to be tested. So testing that user is simple. We just create it with his name, and we just prepare this. We just set it up like this, very easy setup, and then go through each scenario as a separate test class and just see what this user can do or cannot do. So in the end, we get a little nice report of what can be done and what can't be done. And this is very nice to at least show it to your developers and say, okay, this is the kind of our business process. This can happen with the registered user, this can happen with a banned user, and nothing can happen with a locked user that's gone for good. This is all nice. I mean, we solved a great deal of our problem, okay? The great deal of worrying about can we do something is done, but we kind of created another problem. That problem is not that we are just now becoming hungry, and I know you are. We are creating our entities with a lot of logic, and we are making them big and big and big and fat. And that's kind of very, very apart, very, very far from the good practice to make our entities lean. So you have to consider, is there a better way to do it? And yes, of course, we are talking about state machines. So naturally, the let's create a state machine is a natural answer. So once again, I'm going to remind you of this picture that I'm going to show you. We have our business process. You saw this graph before. The circles are places where our entities live. The arrows are transition from one place to another. And at this point, we would want, am I annoying the cameraman by just moving? No? Okay, sorry. So at this point, we would like to have a library that you can show this picture to it, and you can code everything for us. That would be like the ideal case. But unfortunately, there's none of those libraries, but you just need to describe the picture in configs. So regarding libraries, there are actually 3. They are ordered by my personal preference. It should not be yours. I really call you to try them out. But the first 2 are really good, and they are being actively maintained. So if you want to focus something, focus on those 2. There are also more packages that are just wrappers, bundles, packages, or something like that for those 2. So if you are using those packages in the context of some popular framework, like Zen, Laravel, Symfony, you'll have like drop-in replacement, the drop-in package for that. So you'll easily so you can use them more easily. I'm coming from a Symfony world, so I'll be using a Symphony Workflow as an example. But everything you hear here is easily transferable to all others. So let's start out with the config. And yeah, Symfony is using YAML as a config, and all of the things that you need to define is going to be defined right here. You just start out with a workflow section. If you are using Symfony Flags, then it would be a separate file for that. But you would define, give a name for our user. That would be our first branch. So we define how to call our state machine, how to define our workflow, and then say, is it the type of the workflow or state machine? Just to digress and not go further into computer science textbooks, state machines are more circle-like, so you can return to the point where you originated, and workflows are more of a business process that goes from one point to another, or if you look at the graphic from top to the bottom. You define also what properties are being used to store those informations. We are just using a single one for storing state, and then we list all the entities that can be used with this workflow, with the state machines. That's the, let's say, complicated part, because you need to get all those things right. If not, a lot of exceptions will be thrown, but you'll figure it out. Then you write down all the places that your model, that your entity can be in. Just write them down. And then continue with writing down all the transitions. So you define from which transition you can go where, either from one to many or just straight to another one. You define all the possible paths there. This really is maybe the tiring process, because you have to type it all in and think about really hard, maybe draw it on the side. But once you get it, all the transitions defined are in one place. And basically, we've done everything as in our previous example with the user state interface and all that, but just in one config file. So using this, after that, becomes very easy. You just pull that out from the dependency, pull the workflow, the state machine from the dependency. You have a user object, and then, like we did in elementary school, you knock on the door and ask, hey, can Marco come out and play? That's the same thing that you do with your objects. Can you apply this transition to this object? Yes, then apply it. And we stopped worrying about it because it's applied. After that, if you inspect an object, the property in that object will be changed. So you are focusing on what needs to be done and not on how to gracefully handle all the cases when it's not available and how to present the error message to a user. You are just writing your business logic here. So after that, we have a user in a different state, and that's it. That's all the logic there is to a state machines. They're really, really not complicated. If you look into workflow as a library, if you look into the constructor, you see one very interesting thing. I mean, it's not so interesting anymore because a lot of people are using events. So the event dispatcher is there. So cool, we can do some stuff with it, and it will become very apparent on what we can do about that. So as our events as our transitions are being applied, a lot of events are being dispatched. So for example, when you ask a workflow, can you apply a transition, there is a guard event being fired. And not just one guard event, it's actually 3, because you have like a global one that will be thrown for every, applied for every transition, and you can go into a more specific one. So every time this is being fired, and you can use that to subscribe to it, and then apply more additional stuff. You need to decide if that transition is going to be allowed. So for example, if you need to check some extra data, if you need to look into some extra repository for more information, are you going to allow that user or not? So in this example, I'm just wanting to check if that user is moderator, because it seems important not to ban moderators from our site. So again, stopping the rogue ones to just ban everybody else and take control of our forum. Of course, if there's any complicated logic, like, hey, let's check user repository if the user maybe has an active subscription, so we need to refund some money if it's in like a paid forum or something like that. This is also a good place to do it. And just not to focus on single event, there are actually many of them. So you can use them from, like, if you want to log it somewhere, you will probably create a leave listener and then log that something is transitioning. When the entered event happens, that's the good place to just flush all the logic in, so you know that the transition has passed. So let's write it down to the database. Sorry. And then, on completed, you know it's finally over and nothing else needs to be done. Also, one cool thing, you can use it in templates. There's a Twig extension that basically all the things that you've been seeing in the services before, you can do in templates. So if you want to just display cool buttons of what can be done, do it like this. So you don't have to worry, do I have to check all the permissions there? Can I display the button? Just, you'll have all the methods ready and display it. Yeah, no, I know that I have banned the admin user, but that was a mistake. Finally, last, maybe even killer feature for me, almost a selling point of why the Symphony Workflow is a top place on my state machine libraries list, is this one. You can dump actually your workflow and then use either a dot or Planet UML libraries to graph it. It seems like a kiddie thing to do. Look, he's playing with circles, but this is actually a strong document that you can show to your clients if you're building something and let them sign off on a process. It's really, really helping a non-tech person visualize what you are doing with your application, and at the same time, you have covered that in your config file. So there's no, but I thought, no, that's one single point of truth. So stakeholders, although C-type personnel in your company will have a clear image of what is going on. So to, again, annoy Miro, I'm going to talk about testing, which now becomes a little bit more complicated. Because we are using state machine, we need to ask our framework what can be applied, what can't be applied. So we just need to instantiate our workflow at the beginning of our test case. And that means that we need to fire the kernel up. That kind of slows things down. But after that, our test cases are practically the same. We just test out, can we do this, or after we apply, is everything as it should be? And again, we expect that exceptions will be thrown or that transitions are handled as they should be. We end up with a nice readable process of what needs to be done and can be shown to a developer. So for possible usages, it's always fun to discuss, hey, Luka, where would you use state machines? If I would be like an evangelist of state machines, I would say, yeah, use them everywhere. So if you have like enable, disable button, use state machines there. It will solve all your problems. It may seem like an overkill because you're basically invoking the whole framework just to enable and disable user. So maybe not do it there. Maybe use that little bit of pragmatic logic and say, yeah, that's maybe not the best use case. But if there's an additional thing that needs to be done after or before the user is becoming, or whatever your entity is becoming active or inactive, consider and think about it. If you are in any kind of e-commerce or some kind of warehouse processing thingy where you need to go through all different states, yeah, I would really, really consider using state machines. Are there projects using it? I technically found just one. It is kind of a big deal if you are doing the e-commerce in a PHP world. Celius is heavily relying on Windows State Machine Bundle, and it's really like a prime example of should you use state machines there or not. So if you want to dig into their code, you'll find it there and just see how they implement it in their whole checkout process. That is real nice. You'll find a lot of packages on packages, as I mentioned, that are just like bundles or wrappers, so you can just plug and play those libraries in your framework and go on. Just implementing state machines in your project can be quite of a hassle. You need to talk a lot with your clients. You need to talk a lot with your teammates. And I strongly suggest that you reach a consensus. Do not be like a cowboy developer and then, yeah, state machines, I'm going to implement it. And then later on, people are telling you, why I can't do this anymore because last week it worked. Figure out what the business processes are, what can be done, where can each entity change its state. By using the state machines, you have like a license to go overboard and be like define all the technical stages that are possible to happen, but in a real world, you would like have 5 stages, and then the manager would say, yeah, but we don't really use those, so just move it to done. And then all of your work is pretty futile. So try not to get all technical. I'd rather go with a minimal set of transition and a minimal set of states, deploy it, and then see how it goes. Once it is out there, bear in mind that changing the config file is very easy, but you already stored some of the entities with some states in the database. So if you kind of delete that entity, if you kind of delete that state from your config file, the workflow is going to be very confused. So treat them same way you would treat like serializing objects and storing them in database. Do not delete the class that you serialized. So that is kind of an overhead thinking. So it's not just very easy just to implement state machines. You have to constantly worry about what is going on. So although you can change them later, think of it what can happen. It's also very good advice to leave a paper trail. There are events that are useful for logging. So log every single state change, because at one point you'll find out yourselves asking, hey, why is this user, that admin user, do you know him? Who is this guy? Because you don't know how that became. But if you log, you will see that, oh, this person registered, left, and then somebody said he's okay, and then somebody promoted him, and so on and so forth. So you have like a complete record. You have a file of that user, what's been going on. So I would not recommend doing anything without a paper trail. So it's kind of natural to combine this thing with event sourcing. It really, really plays well because you have all those events that happen to user becoming an admin. Unfortunately, it's not all that green. There are certain downsides to using state machines. If you have been to this morning keynote, you are technically coupling your logic to the framework, to the library. So that might not appeal to the purists in everyone. So do some pros and cons, see how it fits. If you are trying to be decoupled as possible, maybe that's not the best way to do it. But if you don't care and if you don't plan switching your framework every 2 weeks, then you should do something like that. Also, as you saw, testing becomes a little bit more complicated in terms of you have to instantiate the old kernel and then ask the framework to do the transitions for you. It's not that it slows your tests down significantly, but it can add up. So if you have like a big chunk of states and you have a lot of places and a lot of things needs to be checked, then maybe testing will be a little bit slower. So that's a trade-off. And of course, if you liked what you see and if all these state pattern and state machines make sense to you, maybe you work in a different language or a different project, so you're saying, oh, the PHP has all the cool stuff. That's really not true. I mean, in almost any modern or any practical language out there, there is some sort of state machine package. So if you really, really want to be mystical, you can check out the last link where there's an implementation in SQL for state machine. I don't suggest using that, but there are things. So, to wake you up, what did we learn today? My class, thank you. Quick recap. We saw that our entities kind of have life of their own. They love to change their behavior, and they can live in our system. And that's not something that we should worry about. all the things that we do as developers, and we use all the frameworks and ORMs are good for storing that state. So use that to handle everything. And think about how you can separate the logic from just storing that into database and storing that into entities somewhere else. Look into state patterns, because state patterns are really, really nice design pattern, just to learn, but to separate that logic. Look at the example from Sebastian Bergman about state, because it's really, really nice to understand. And then in the end, consider using state machines in your project. It will not solve all your problems you have, but if there's a feeling that you have, there might be a use case for just one thing, then I'd really say it's worth the hassle of adding another dependency and then moving all your logic there. As I am a teacher, I'm always happy to answer your questions. There are really, really no bad time to ask them. You can do it right now. Just raise the hand and the mic will come to you. If you are shy, you can come to me later. There's, again, no bad time to ask questions. If you decide to ask questions at lunch, I can talk with my mouth full. Don't worry about it. Really, really no bad time to ask questions. I can pick somebody. Yes? You'll have A for effort.
Okay. So my question is, you gave out nice examples of where to use it and how to use it, but I'm wondering, in your experience, do you have any examples of where it was misused or where they tried to make something easier but end up complicating it a lot or something like that?
Luckily, that's actually a good question that inverts everything that I've been talking about. Luckily, no. I mean, it's pretty new. I mean, the last library was like, okay, I'll just lie to you. I don't know how old it is, but it is there for quite a while. So the two newer ones just became popular a year ago. So there are really, really no projects that are like misusing it. Personally, I have used it in one project. So again, I don't have like a broad experience to tell you. There was one case that backfired on me. If I do, I'll include it in the talk. So yeah, thank you for that. Yeah.
Thank you.
So does anybody else want to get the t-shirt thrown in the face? If you do, just ask the person behind you to ask a question. No, that was half a hand, no?
Look, if it's okay with you, they can ask you questions in the middle track or in the meantime, while in between the lectures. Since we know that probably people don't want to.
Okay, that's no problem. If I can just get the video of the slides back, because I have one last favor to ask you. There's one great conference in Zagreb being organized in October. A couple of my friends and I are throwing out the webcam. It's a language agnostic conference related to web development, and our call for paper is open, and tickets are up for like 40 euros ahead. So if you would like to come to Zagreb, spend a couple of days with a really, really nice crowd, I suggest you check this conference out. Thank you very much.
Applause for Luka.
Enjoy.
Thank you. As we decided, you can ask questions in the middle track. You already know about our evaluation pools. Please check them out once more. You did it yesterday, do it today. I'm going to remind you exactly 12 o'clock sharp. We're going to have here Branislav Bujicic, product engineer in platform.sh. Thank you. 12 o'clock sharp. Thank you.